Verrückte Salt. What was your creepiest experience with cockroaches? This story is from my roommate. His mom's doctor told her this story about a time a little girl with a broken arm came into his office complaining about a really bad pain and itchiness under her cast. He cuts it open and out pours hundreds of cockroaches, big ones and small ones. They had been breeding in her cast and eating her flesh for nourishment. Chew on that for a while. Sorry to anyone currently wearing a cast. I was about 11 or 12, decided to make some chocolate milk. I grabbed the can of chocolate syrup from the cabinet. Apparently someone had taken the top off and put it back like that. Didn't think twice about it and poured some into a glass of milk, apparently not looking closely. Stir and drink. I feel weird little bumps in my mouth. Look into the glass and see about 10 dead baby cockroaches floating at the top. When I worked in retail at a certain computer retail store that shall henceforth remain nameless, I was a service writer for the repair department. One day, a customer brings in a computer to be serviced that immediately turns itself off the moment someone attempts to power it up. Of course, we immediately suspected a bad power supply, as any good technician would. But the person next to me notices that there are these little black hairs sticking out from some of the cracks in the case somehow. Thinking that perhaps it was just dirty, someone gets the bright idea of cracking open the case and prepares to blast it with an air compressor. Total freakout. It turns out those little black hairs were all roach antennas, and the computer was absolutely filled to capacity with them. They started crawling around everywhere, so we stuffed the PC into a garbage bag as quickly as we could and took it outside. Whereupon an exterminator, who happened to be stopping by for some software discreetly, asked us to point him in the direction of the customer. I'd have to say that's probably my biggest computer-related gross-out moment ever, and I will never again be able to see a cockroach without my stomach developing an ulcer at the thought that my computer, too, may one day have roaches in it. Sad face. My emotional scars from roaches run deep. I was living in Portugal for a few months when I was 6 or 7 years old, and there were a lot of roaches around the block of flats where my parents and I were staying. I thought the roaches were pretty cool and interesting at first, and I liked watching them running over my ceiling and walking across the bedroom floor. I grew up mostly in Ireland where we didn't really have roaches. Then, one night, I woke up absolutely covered in them. I don't know why the local roach population had suddenly decided that my bed was the most awesome place to be, but apparently they had. I was covered in them. They crawled over my pillow, on my face, under the blanket, all over my body and bed. I started screaming, and my dad came into my room and turned on the light, at which point the roaches retreated from the light, further under my blanket and bed, and into my clothes. I remember my dad throwing my blanket off the bed and picking me up and shaking me, and eventually all the roaches were off me. But it seemed to take a really long time. Needless to say, I did not really sleep easily for any of the rest of the time we spent in Portugal, and I've got something of a phobia of the bastards now. I had never seen roaches before, but when I was visiting my grandmother in Hawaii, I took some trash out. The trash room was dark, and when I hit the light switch, The entire floor moved. Creepy. We took out this sandwich maker that had been sitting in storage for God knows how long. No one cleaned it properly, and someone made my sandwiches for lunch at school. So I happily eat them, and a couple of hours later, I feel really sick. I throw up in the middle of the classroom, and again, and a few more times by the time they got me to the nurse's office. Turns out there were roach eggs in the sandwich maker, and I ate them. I've got an unnatural fear of roaches ever since. I was living in good old Montgomery, Alabama, about 8 years old when we kept noticing that cockroaches kept getting into our house. My dad is away on business, so my mom calls Terminix to come out and spray the house down. Terminix guy comes out, sprays house. Hundreds of roaches get pissed as shit and start coming out of the walls, etc. of the house. Mom is handling baby bro, so hands me a broom and orders me to be the man of the house and sweep them off the porch. Worst decision of my life. I'm not afraid of roaches at this point in my life, so I was quick to jump to the task. Midway through sweeping these prehistoric bitches off my porch, I spot an albino roach. This guy was pure white and kinda see-through. Now, what happened next occurred within a matter of 3 seconds. I go to hit the albino with the broom, and he flies up my shorts and starts squiggling and wriggling around. I throw the broom down and scream bloody murder, running around our front yard. I'm still scared of roaches and have never seen an albino since. I have an irrational fear of roaches. It wasn't always this way. I was 8 or so and went camping with my folks. I wandered off with a few kids I'd met and came across an abandoned town/storefronts. On the side of one of the buildings was a wooden cutout of an ice cream cone. It was leaning on one of its sides. So, being a curious kid, I tried to move it around to play with it. It tipped over toward me, basically falling down. Behind it was a huge, huge nest of roaches. I didn't really count, and I didn't stay long enough to count. I ran, screaming for miles. It really was a sea of black under it. I'm creeped out just thinking about it. I got up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water, stumbled into the kitchen without turning the light on, grabbed my mug of water off the counter, and began to drink. A roach crawled out of the mug and onto my face as I was drinking. While living in India, we arrived a little early for our train, so we decided to wait just outside the station. We placed our backpacks against the lamppost and shared a little snack. A little later, when we took our backpacks to go inside the train station, we discovered dozens and dozens of cockroaches all over our backpacks, trying to hide under the rain covers we used to protect our bags. Our bags had created a shade from the lamppost, and the roaches decided to do some exploring. It took me a long time to actually wear my backpack again. I worked in a bakery. There were lots of roaches. I began cleaning obsessively. One day, a roach crawled onto the counter. I was freaked as hell and needed napkins to kill it and then sanitize. I covered it with a cup like a spider. Then, as I lifted the cup to kill it, babies came out everywhere. Ugh, so gross. I never felt clean there. I honestly wasn't going to do this, but after reading these horror stories, I felt that I must. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a hospital in a small town on the Gulf Coast of Alabama. This woman was brought into the ER late night on a weekend for cardiac failure. They asked me, the ER tech, to look into her purse to see if it contained any medication she was on. When I opened the purse, I would say 10 to 12 cockroaches flew or scurried out of her purse. This is not the worst part. Mind you, I have an almost unnatural fear of cockroaches. This woman was in her high 70s. We got her heart started, but as we had to disrobe her and check her out, we noticed she was obviously bedridden from her bed sores and such. Through her body search, we noticed that her lower region was twitching. One of the female nurses checked, and as she did, 3 large roaches crawled out. They were building a nest inside her. My skin still crawls to this day thinking about that shit. This happened about 10 years ago. Bought a new microwave oven from Best Buy, unboxed it, and set it up. A couple days later, we think we see something moving in one of the kitchen cabinets. Soon, we see things moving in the whole kitchen, including the stove. One night, I snapped on the kitchen light, and they're all over with a bunch of them coming and going from the vent in the side of the microwave. I took it outside and opened it up the next day. Massive roach nest inside. Took 3 months worth of roach treatments to get rid of them. The bug guy said they had seen a lot of this since manufacturing had shifted out of the country. Washington, D.C., Adams Morgan neighborhood, 1970s. Tidy apartment building, teeming with roaches. All the kitchenettes had walls backed with painted pegboard. Pegboard. At night, I would go into the kitchen, flip on the light, and the walls would be awash with bugs doing North Korean Army parade ground maneuvers from floor to ceiling. They'd quickly vanish into the pegboard, and then their little antennae would emerge from each hole. My girlfriend and I had a detergent bottle and a squirt gun, each filled with rubbing alcohol. We'd squirted into the holes. I still remember the stench of roach shit mixed with the reek of the isopropyl alcohol and pot. It was fun. Later, I bought a 300-pound vintage dental chair, which turned out to have the mothership of roach hives deep in its bowels. That didn't help, but the pot did. This was about 13 or 14 years ago. I usually have a drink beside my bed that I drink first thing in the morning. This particular night, I was drinking a Pepsi. I put the can on the nightstand. The next morning, I woke up and took a swig of Pepsi. A roach had crawled in there and died during the night, and I spit it out. The citric acid in the Pepsi had dissolved part of the roach's body. Very gross. Luckily, I don't remember the taste. Winky face. I used to live in the Philippines, and let me tell you, you know when a roach is close to you. Over here, roaches have a distinct musky smell. I've had many horror stories. Most were of me being in a dark bathroom/hallway, and I can smell them in the room, but was too scared to touch the light switch. One experience I can't forget though. I was in 3rd grade and we were in a bus on our way to a museum for a field trip. The bus wasn't too old. There were TVs and AC in there, so it wasn't bad. Anyway, an hour into the trip, I saw a small cockroach on my sleeve. Didn't think anything of it and just flicked it off. Another 5 minutes goes by, and there was another one on my sleeve. As I moved my other arm to flick it, 2 more came up from under the armrest on my seat. I was disgusted now and wanted to see where they were coming from, so I lifted the top part of my armrest. Bad idea. There were at least 15 of those fuckers, ranging from small to large, that got disturbed right under my arm. They were coming out from under the armrest to feed on the crumbs of our snacks. All my classmates in my vicinity saw and moved to the other side. The roaches were spread all over the place, within 3 feet of me by now, and the bus driver had to park the bus. The kids got out, while the teachers tried to kill the roaches with what they had: alcohol, newspapers, etc. And after a while, it looked safe. The rest of the trip went without a hitch, but that shit traumatized me as a kid. My mom was a member of her college chorus, and they frequently traveled to perform concerts. One day, they arrived at a church in Florida, which was the location of their next concert, and had to change into their concert gear before the show. This was in the 80s, and she went to a Christian college, so all the ladies have to wear hose and long skirts, and so on. Everything seemed fine. So, 20 minutes into the performance, my mom feels something in her leg. Something crawling. She reaches down and kind of slaps her leg, but that doesn't stop it. It keeps crawling. So she encloses her hand over the lump and holds it in place, still singing for another half hour until the concert is finished. The show must go on. Turns out there was a cockroach inside her pantyhose. It had crawled in while she was getting dressed. There was a roach in her pants for over an hour. I moved into the studio apartment that seemed pretty clean, but later found out it was infested with roaches. A horrifying fact to discover when you're sleeping with a futon mattress on the floor. The management refused to do anything about it, so I bought a bunch of traps and gel and laid it out. The gel worked best, and every day after I put it out, I would sweep a bunch of dead/half-dead roaches out from the cabinet under the sink and flush them down the toilet. This became part of my morning routine. However, one day, I went to sweep up a particularly big corpse, and it exploded into dozens of tiny cockroach babies running everywhere. That is a moment I still to this day have nightmares about. I was 12 and my brother was 8. It was around 10:30 p.m. on the 4th of July. We stood under a streetlight on the neighboring cul-de-sac while the adults and older kids set off fireworks for the crowd. It happened in a flash. The roach landed on and crawled all the way into my brother's ear before he even had a chance to blink. For the next 20 minutes, he screamed non-stop, shaking his head toward the ground and back up, digging his fingers deep into his ear canal. Eventually, he ran back home. Someone put a flashlight to his ear and the roach crawled out and flew away. He still hates to hear me retell the story. This happened back in the college days. Around 3 a.m., I'm woken up by my phone ringing. I pick up and hear my then-girlfriend shouting something between sobbing and deep gasps of breath.
And subscribe, please.
I thought, holy crap, someone's broken in and attacked her. Once I got her to calm down, so I could understand what she was trying to tell me, this is what horror had occurred. She says,
I was asleep and I felt something in my mouth and I bit down and it was a cockroach. Oh my God.
I'm like, holy shit, gross. Did you brush your teeth? And she says,
Fuck, yes. 20 times in a row now. Come get me, come get me. I need to get out of this apartment.
I said, I'm on my way, but don't kiss me. You stayed a while and listened. Here's a side quest. Head to the comments and tell me what you are most afraid of. And be on the lookout, as I may just personally thank you in a future video. I'd like to personally thank Marvel Bus for completing a side quest and supporting this channel. Please continue to enjoy these creepy, crawly roach stories. Ew. I lived in rural South Africa for a bit. Being out in the bush for 6 months can pretty much rid a person of any squeamishness they might have had towards creepy crawlies. One day, however, while driving into the municipality, Josini, on a hot summer day of like 110 degrees out, the shitty little car I was driving started to overheat. So, a trick I knew was to turn on the heater, and this would draw some of the heat away from the engine. As soon as it was on, roaches started fleeing the floorboards and vents, climbing all over me and a coworker. Hundreds of them trying to escape the heat via climbing up our legs and into our pants, and up the back of our seats into our shirts. Worst car ride ever. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, living in Australia, where the roaches are huge and fly. My family was busy playing mahjong, and I wanted a Coke. I noticed a teacup on the counter with some Coke, and without thinking, I took a swig. I noticed it was chunky, but I was young and finished drinking it, despite the chunks. I mentioned the chunky drink to my cousins, and they said that there had been a dead cockroach in there. I've probably been attacked by cockroaches more than anyone else on this thread. This was my most recent attack. It happened a few weeks ago. It was about 6 a.m., and I woke up to some tingly feeling on my hand. I shook it, thinking it was falling asleep or something. It continued and started moving, but I ignored it, thinking my body was just fucking with me or something. I then felt it go all the way down my body, across my legs, and to my feet. I grabbed my phone and shined my light to see what the fuck was going on. And there's a cockroach, about 3 fucking inches long. I freaked the fuck out and got out of bed. I turned the light on and searched my room, but there wasn't anything there. I ripped apart my bed, under my bed, everything. Nothing was there. So I went to the bathroom and kinda sat there for a while, thinking I was losing my mind, or at least dreaming. I went back to my room after calming down, and right there, on my wall, was the goddamn roach. It was high up in the corner, so I threw a towel at it to get it down. I lifted up the towel, and it ran right towards me. Of course, please, someone tell me why they do this. After it stopped, I threw the towel on top of it again, and it latched on this time. I grabbed the towel and threw it out into the garage. Fuck. No, I don't live in a dump. My house is clean for the most part. They just know where I live. When I lived in Hawaii as a kid, I loved climbing trees. They had all sorts of crazy climbable trees in my neighborhood. One time, I broke off a tree branch, only to discover a very green centipede wiggling around out of the hole. Freaked the hell out of me. Anyways, my worst roach story happened when I was climbing a new tree that had a Y-dip for me to grab onto to pull myself up. When I reached up and put my weight onto it, I felt a scurrying sensation on my fingers, and when I pulled my hand off, there were about 5 roaches crawling around on my hand. I will never climb trees in Hawaii again. I've actually only seen 1 roach in my life so far, and I'd like to keep it that way. I was at a pizza place with a group of maybe 5 or 6 people, and because it was so crowded, we all crammed into a single booth. No sooner are we finished eating, does the girl across from me shriek and hit the shoulder of the girl next to her. A giant roach had dropped out of nowhere, landed on her shoulder, and was now right in the middle of the table trying to scuttle away. Everyone goes flying out of the booth, except for the cute little Japanese exchange student we were with. She just takes a napkin and scrunches it without batting an eye, and calmly says, "Oh, it must have been very slow if I could catch it." It was awesome. I'm a bit of an insectophobe, but usually it's only with bugs and crawlies that are in my safe space, i.e. inside where I live, shit, etc. This time, I was at my parents' house for Christmas break, and as usual, we were outside doing yard work. They live in Alabama, so there's problems with roaches and other bugs in their water oaks. This tree in particular was dead, and it threatened the power line to the house, and quite frankly, the house itself. So my father, mother, and I were around this tree, my father with a small chainsaw. We cut the tree, and it fell in the right spot, away from the house and a power line. Then, my father cut into said fallen tree to make it into smaller chunks so we could haul it to a burn pile. I will never forget this day when what looked like black water flowed out of the cut open tree. Only it wasn't water. It was roaches. Dozens of roaches poured out of this tree, and me just standing there, frozen in fear of what my brain was telling my body, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But still, I stood frozen in fear. A lesser man would have sworn off being outside, would have sworn off bugs, gotten a flight home right then, etc. After what seemed like an eternity of fear while watching my parents stomp around on the bugs, my mother cackling with demonic glee, I stomped on a few, and they all eventually died or disappeared. TLDR, cut a tree down. It was full of roaches. Looked like water flowing out, but it was dozens of roaches. Also grubs. Not mine, but someone I know lived in a share house for a while, in Queensland, where the roaches are huge. They had an electric kettle that was in constant use, tea, coffee, etc. One day, someone decided it could probably do with a decalcifying and opened it up. Inside, there was a giant roach, boiled white. If you like listening to stories read by an actual person, look no further. That's right, I will never utilize an AI voice to tell these stories. Please support this channel by hitting like and subscribing. Yours truly, Verrückte Salt.